What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2008 Mercedes-Benz W211 E63 AMG. Today on the E63 behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace your tie rods. We have a Lemforder kit in front of us, which is available on fcpero.com. And that includes everything you need to do a full tie rod replacement, including your inner, your outers, your boots, as well as clamps and hardware. Now, these don't really have a service interval, as every single time you touch the steering wheel on your vehicle, the tie rods are doing their job. Now, the car behind us has 145,000 miles on it. It is on its original tie rods, and once we get underneath the car, we'll show you the boots are actually starting to tear. Now, the car still aligns okay. If you're going to the alignment shop and they're not able to align the car, usually that means the tie rod, either the inner or the outer, is worn, so that's a good sign to replace them. You have a little bit of slop in the steering wheel, it's a good time to inspect them as well. But before we get started on this job, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this DIY. And now for tools. For this job, we have two different size torque wrenches. We have a 1/2-inch drive and a 3/8 drive. We have a 22, a 21, and a 13mm wrench. I have two different sized adjustable pliers as well as some Odoker pliers. We have a 17mm socket, two different size 21s, one for the 3/8, one for the 1/2-inch drive, a 22mm socket with a small 1/2-inch extension, an 8mm socket for our belly pan hardware. We have a flathead screwdriver. We have a set of calipers here, not mandatory, but they come in very handy. We have our ball joint removal tool. This is CTA 4013. You're going to use that with a 24mm socket or wrench. And then some nice to haves, but not mandatory, is electric tools. We have an electric ratchet and an electric impact. We have a paint pen so that we can mark down everything once we torque it. A little bit of liquid moly ceramic paste. This will come in handy on the new threads of our inner tie rod end, so that when we thread on our outer tie rod end, it hopefully doesn't seize onto itself in the future. And a hammer, of course, that comes in handy with the ball joint removal tool. Now we know what we're working with. Let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, we're going to start under the W211, and we're going to start by removing our splash shield, the center one that covers the steering rack. It's held up by 4 8mm bolts. We're going to go ahead and take our 8mm on our electric ratchet and zap them off. And we can go ahead and pull the panel off and set it to the side. Now with our panel off, we have a better view of the tie rod, inner and outer end, as well as our boots. Before we touch anything else, we're going to take this opportunity while we're under here to measure the distance of our old tie rod so we can have a rough setup for when we install our new ones. Now, sometimes you can count threads, you can count the number of times you turn the outer end off of the inner. Personally, I just like to use a caliper. It gives me a little bit more of an easier and accurate read. So I'll go ahead and measure that quickly. I'm going to write the measurement on the old tie rod somewhere, and then we'll go ahead and get the car a little bit eye level, and we'll start taking off our wheel. All right, we got 72.8 millimeters. That'll just give us a rough idea of what to set the new ones to. We're mainly going to focus on the passenger side of the W211 today. However, the steps are going to be identical for the driver's side. Now, let's get the car a little bit more eye level, and we'll get this wheel off. All right, now we're going to work on getting our wheel off. We have 5 17mm lug bolts to remove. So I got the 17 on the impact. We'll go ahead and zap them off. All right, now that we have more access to everything, our next step is going to be to break free the lock nut that connects our inner and outer, that pinches our inner and outer tie rod together. So let's grab our wrench. We'll get a little bit more eye level with that, and we'll break it free. All right, underneath the car, our next step is going to be to break free the locking nut so that we can separate these two units and get our tie rod removal tool on there. So, 21mm wrench. I've already soaked this with a little bit of penetrating fluid. We do live in New England, so these are pretty crusty. I'm expecting them to be seized, to be quite honest, but we'll go ahead and give it a try. Also, as you may have seen just a moment ago or now, the boot on this tie rod end is pretty toasted. So just by moving this back and forth, you can see how ripped and exposed that joint is. Another thing you can do is grab your wheel, give it a left and right shake. If you have a lot of play in it, then there's a good chance that your tie rods are toasted. All right. Well, at this point, we have the nut backed up enough so that we can thread off our outer end once we separate it from the carrier. So now, what I recommend you do if you're doing this at home is if you just insert the key into the ignition, it'll unlock the electronic steering lock. That way, once you're working with this, you can turn the wheels left and right and get a little bit better access to the hardware. So let's get eye level with it once more. We'll turn the wheel full lock right, and then we'll have an easier shot at getting this 22mm nut off our old tie rod. All right, now we're gonna work on removing the 22mm nut on our tie rod end or ball joint end. One thing to note, the new LEM 40 units use a 21mm, so just keep in mind that sometimes as you're replacing old hardware with new hardware, the sizes may change a bit. So 22 for this old locking nut. We're just gonna put it on the impact and try to zap it off. There we go. Now we'll use our ball joint separator tool and we'll get that off of our carrier. We'll take our CTA tool, get it situated into place. And we'll snug it up. And then we'll use our 24mm socket. We're just gonna throw it on the impact gun to zap it off real quick. Don't tell anybody. 24mm socket. There we go. Now with that free, we can literally just go ahead and twist off the end. Now, again, be prepared depending on where you live and what kind of condition your vehicle is in. There's been times where I've done these jobs and I've had to cut off the tie rod end because the lock nut is too seized or this is too seized. Try a little bit of heat first, penetrating fluid, and then hopefully you don't have to do that. But just be prepared that that is a possibility. All right, we're gonna hang on to this for now. I have my measurement on here. Then we're gonna thread off the remainder of the locking nut if possible. Might be a little bit seized on there. Let's get underneath it a little bit better. We're gonna have to counter hold it and then we'll get the nut off. The reason I want to remove it is so I can slide the boot off in full and be able to slip on my tie rod removal tool. Using a 13mm to counter hold to the inner 21mm wrench for the locking nut, we'll go ahead and get this off. Now this one's a bit bound up from the rust and corrosion, so it might be a little bit tough at first, but you just gotta work it off and then it should ease up. There we go, finally. All right, with that removed, now we can grab our pliers and remove this inner pinch clamp on the end of our boot. Now we can take our pliers, pinch the end of this clamp, and pull it off. Now we're gonna get a little bit more eye level with the car. This is gonna depend on where your Oetiker clamps are pinched. Ours are just underneath the subframe. So we're gonna go ahead and reach in between the subframe and the top of the boot. Sometimes they're down here, which makes them a little bit easier, but we'll grab our long flathead screwdriver and we'll pry that clamp off next. All right, I have a long-ish flathead screwdriver. I like the size of this because it fits inside the pinch on the Oetiker clamp, but we're gonna reach down in between the boot and the subframe, get to the head of the clamp, and then just work on prying it open so that we can remove the clamp. Sweet. With this old clamp off, now it's just a matter of grabbing the boot and pulling it off our inner tie rod. Also, one thing to note, The axial joint on this thing is absolutely smoked. This should be nice and firm, which we'll compare with the new one, but just another good reason on why we needed to replace these. Okay. Now, you could reuse these boots typically if they're in good shape. They do tear out every now and then, but we have fresh new ones today. We're going to use the new ones. However, nothing wrong with reusing a perfectly good boot. All right, now we're going to grab our tie rod removal tool. We'll get situated a little bit better, and we'll work on removing the inner tie rod portion. All right, my good people, we are going to have to get caveman on this and use some adjustable pliers. I took a caliper to the end of this and our new one. It measures 40.78 or 76 millimeters. I unfortunately do not have a wrench that size, so pliers, it's going to be, we have a 22 millimeter wrench to counter hold our steering rack, so we don't put a lot of strain on that. So we'll do our best here. So I'm going to counter hold with my left hand, and we'll break free with our right. All right. Well, I'll get it off. We'll go ahead and thread this old one off, and we'll get our new one started. Now, for those of you with the right tools at home, if you're following along, you're going to be torquing the spec. The torque is 110 Newton meters for the inner portion into your steering rack. So let's grab our new piece, and we'll go ahead and get that one started. All right, my good people, we're going to take our new fresh inner and get that started by hand. You can see just by me installing this inner how much stiffer this axial joint is compared to the one that we pulled out. So this is definitely going to be a massive upgrade for this W211. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you have the proper tooling and you can torque this, 110 Newton meters is going to be your goal. For today, we're going to do our best to snug it up using the tools we have, which will be our 22 and our adjustable. All right, I'm pretty happy with where that landed. So now we can take our new boot and go ahead and slip it over our steering rack. One thing to note, this is pretty standard on most tie rods, but there is a dedicated spot in between them for the end of your boot to sit on. It also helps keep the clamp in place. All right, what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna go over to my other wheel. I'm just gonna bring the steering rack in a little bit as we had it turned all the way right. That'll help me get this boot on just a little bit easier. All right, let's go ahead and slide our new outer curve clamp over. I'm gonna adjust this one over one more tooth. Sometimes these come a little too open, and if you put it on as is, it's not gonna clamp as tightly as it can. So we'll adjust it one notch. There we go. It's very snug as it is, just like that. We're gonna leave it in a nice, easy to reach spot for the next one. And then we'll go ahead, we'll take our outer curve clamps and we'll pinch it down. Beautiful. Now we can take our new outer clamp, same thing, pinch it, get it ready for install, and we can slide it on over the end of our boot. Beautiful. Next, we're going to take our new locking nut. We'll get that one started by hand. And then I'm going to take my caliper and I'm going to measure roughly the distance that I want. Again, for me, I measured on the outer ridge of that small spacing for the clamp to the back of the nut. So let's go ahead and do the same thing once more. All right. Got my measurement roughly where I want it. Now we can take our new outer. Get that one started on here by hand. You know what I'm going to do though? Before we install this, I'm going to take a pinch of liquid moly ceramic paste and I'm going to put it on the threads. You can use anti-seize or something similar just to keep that one step less, if you will, from seizing onto the inner. And that way, whenever you need to get an alignment done or something like that, you have a better chance at being able to do that in the future. So give me one moment. We'll put a small dab on there. All right. Just a little bit there. You can also get some on the locking nut. It's not going to hurt it. It'll help it in the long run as well. Just get it in between the threads there. Should be more than enough. I'm going to have to redo that because I had already set my measurement, but that's no problem. Inner tie rod can go on. Also, if you haven't looked already, they are stamped R and L for right and left, which is really nice of Lemforder to do, so it's hard to confuse them. I love it. All right. Now at this point, we can go ahead and bring our wheel carrier in if we need to, and we can get our tie rod end situated. We just need to bring it in a hair here. And then our new locking nut can go on top. All right, while I have you down here, we're gonna go ahead and snug up our locking nut against the outer tie rod. Now, if you were torquing this with a crow's foot per se, you'd wanna torque it down to 60 Newton meters. We're just gonna go ahead and snug it up. This car is gonna go straight to the alignment shop after this, so they're gonna be undoing this anyways to adjust it. Should your alignment be very far off before you leave your home or your shop, you can always take your 21 and break free your locking nut and then adjust the inner so that the outer can go in and out with a 13mm wrench, similar to how we counterheld the old unit when we were removing the old locking nut. All right. All right, my good people, let's get eye level with everything and we'll torque down our new 21mm nut on the end of our tie rod. All right, my good people, we're gonna go ahead and tighten down our 21mm nut. Now, there is a counter hold on the Lemforder ball joint end, which is great. Sometimes these will spin on you, even though they are tapered, they don't always usually stick. So should you need a counter hold, you would use a 5mm hex bit. For now, we're gonna try our luck without counter holding. I have a 21 on my 3/8 drive ratchet. I'm just gonna do my best to snug it up and then we'll torque it down. I'm pushing up on it so that the tapered end sits as far into the carrier as possible to hopefully keep it from spinning. That worked out pretty well. Now we're gonna go ahead and torque this down to 50 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. All right. And then some torque wrenches have angle modes on them, which come in really handy when you're doing something that requires an additional degree. For today, we don't have that. We're just gonna mark it with a paint pen. And then we'll clock it 90 degrees using that as a reference. Beautiful. And we'll go ahead and paint mark it for good luck. Keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't free up on us. Beautiful. With that, we're just gonna go ahead and straighten this out. And now we can get ready to put our wheel back on. And as I mentioned, we're working on the front passenger side of the car today. However, the driver's side is gonna be identical. Now we can go ahead and throw our wheel back on. Then we'll start fitting our 17mm lug bolts back in. I like to use a socket, it gives me a better grasp. And we'll snug them up with the gun. And before we go ahead and get this unit off the lift and torque down these wheels, we're gonna go ahead and put our splash shield back on. If you haven't done so already, it's held on by 4 8mm bolts. So we'll throw that on quickly, and then we'll torque down our wheel. Now we can go ahead and torque down our wheels to 135 Newton meters or 100 foot-pounds. All right, baby. And there we have it. Another DIY in the books. Overall, a really straightforward job doing tie rods on the W211. We hope that you liked this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave them in the comment box below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.